Good afternoon, everybody. If you can take your seats. I appreciate you being here. My name is Kevin Ackland, Chief of Staff for Mayor Peduto. Pleased to just kick off yet another event here, a meeting of the Blue Ribbon Panel to consider IMG's work relating to PWSA. First and foremost, again, appreciate all the work that you guys have been doing from the very beginning. Very busy members of the community here to help us in a very open, public, transparent manner take a hard look at the authority. And I also do want to thank the board and leadership at PWSA. I think we've been all working very hard to address some of the problems while this hard look at the future of this authority is being done under the leadership of Steve Steckler at IMG. So for today's purposes, I want to have Steve set the agenda here for today. This is our second of the public meetings that we're having that's going to lead to a set of recommendations that we'll all consider together. We do want to open it up for public comment. I have a number of folks here who have signed up to give. We'd ask to have those limited to 3 minutes. And then we have invited with us some folks from Indianapolis as well as Tulsa. Two other municipalities have dealt with similar situations as we have here in the city of Pittsburgh relating to our water authority, just to give a sense as to how the problems emerged in their communities, how they dealt with them, how the public came together to present solutions to rebuild their own water and sewer authorities. And then finally have an open session for the panelists to ask the hard questions. Again, that's the charge. Every time we sit at this table is to ask hard questions, and that goes to the public as well. There is no topics that should not be addressed, this is the time to do so. These decisions will be made not in the back room. They'll be made in an open, public, transparent manner. So with that, I'd ask Steve Steckler from IMG to kick us off.
Thank you. First of all, it's good to see you all again. I've got some great things very interesting things to tell you today. This is probably one of the richest in terms of new information that's being transferred as part of this deliberation process. And the highlight, of course, will be our guest presenters today. On August 28th, we met and we delivered a briefing book on the restructuring options, and hopefully you've had a chance to review that. Since then, we tried to be balanced in the information we included in the briefing book, and we hope that was sufficiently so. If you have any further questions or need for any more information, please ask us and we will get that information for you. Second, we relayed our initial impressions, the initial impressions from our operations and maintenance and asset management team, and they're looking at PWSA's system. We will actually be delivering the final results of that in a memorandum form, which will be sent to everyone and also posted on the microsite for the restructuring initiative. So everyone's going to see that final memoranda as well. Today, of course, we're going to explore some examples of restructuring that have taken place around the country with utilities that have been faced with similar issues. These are actually two very different utilities, somewhat similarly sized, but different in terms of their structure. And so when we talk about restructuring, we thought these were two excellent examples of alternatives for structuring. In the case of the Tulsa Metropolitan Utility Authority, this is an example of internal improvement, meaning the pre-existence of a very strong and independent and high-profile, prestigious governing board overseeing a dramatic restructuring of the internal restructuring of the utility. To share that information, share that story with you, I'm pleased to introduce Lauren Brookie, who is a former chairman of the Tulsa Metropolitan Utility Authority, a current board member, and most importantly, in this case, the chairman of the Utility Enterprise Initiative, which is the moniker given to the Tulsa TMUA's aggressive restructuring effort. She is joined, although he will not be presenting to this panel, she is joined by Eric Lee, who is the finance director for the Tulsa Metropolitan Utility Authority, the Department of Water and Sewer in the city of Tulsa. And he's actually been responsible for the staff level execution of the restructuring initiatives within the utility, as well as the implementation of the performance standards and performance agreements that are interdepartmental, that have been a key to the success of the restructuring initiative in Tulsa. They will be, for those of you who have additional questions, please, again, submit those questions if you aren't able to ask them here, and we will see to it that they get to Lauren and to Eric and to Dan Evans, who is going to be our our first presenter. Our plane schedules dictate the order here, by the way, not even the alphabet. Dan is the president of the chairman, of the board of trustees of Citizens Energy Group, which is a private nonprofit charitable trust which owns the assets of the water and sewer assets of the city of Indianapolis. Dan is here to represent an introduction to the restructuring option of a transfer of the assets to an ostensibly non-independent, non-governmental entity that also provides, in this case, other utility services. And Dan will be talking about the examples of that transfer. In addition to, I should add, they also have other careers besides the ones which they're not really paid for. In Lauren's case, she is the Director of Communications for the Tulsa Community College System. And Dan is the just recently retired president or CEO of the Indiana University Health System, which is the Indianapolis and Indiana counterpart to the UPMC here. So he'll be talking about his experience. He's both Lauren and Dan have been really the folks steering their restructurings. And so we are very grateful to have them here to tell you about those, and grateful to them for making the effort to come here. So we'll start off with Dan.
Actually,
I'm
before
sorry.
we
No,
begin-
I'm sorry. Yes,
Dan,
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dan.
Right. We have
Yeah, so
Public
first and
comments
foremost,
first.
there was a request, actually, so we do have a number of speakers. I thought it would be helpful for our out-of-town guests to listen to the community. This is, again, the mayor feels very strongly that the community voice should be heard here. So what we want to do to begin, we have some speakers. We had a list of folks sign up, and we'd like you to hear their comments first. So first on the list, I have County Controller Chelsea Wagner.
Afternoon.
Thank you.
So, as Kevin said, I'm the county controller for Allegheny County, and we've been involved with some of our water issues from the standpoint of first looking at what the health department for the county was and was not doing. But today here, I want to direct my comments to what is being considered by the city that I believe to be very, very dangerous, and not necessarily remembering some of our history, some fairly recent history with respect to water. So first, I think we have to just keep in mind what we're talking about here. And talking about our water, meaning that it belongs to the residents of the city and is governed in trust by our city government. And I'm reminded in this, if any of you saw the movie The Big Short, which of course is based on Michael Lewis's book by the same name, and it gives the history of the housing bubble. And in that scenario, as we all know, you had millions of Americans, many residents here in this city, who lost life savings and even homes through an intentionally complex, layered scheme that by design masked what was going on. And some of you will remember this, but in a very memorable scene, you had a very beautiful actress there, sits in a bubble bath, holding a glass of champagne, speaking directly to the camera, and says in plain English what these very complex instruments were. And though she used a 4-letter word that I won't repeat here, suffice it to say that she referred to it as crap, that it was basically masking something very simple that was affecting people terribly. And I would say we have some of those same dynamics here today. We're talking about water. We're talking about finances. We're talking about pipes. Frankly, this isn't really rocket science. We have to remember our history. In spite of all the money spent, including $500,000 for the report that's being discussed today, and I would say good money going after bad, and all the very capable people who are assembled here, including yourselves, who were asked to lend your names and your time to this blue ribbon panel, we don't even know where the lead lines are in our city, and we're being told that we won't know until at least spring of 2018. The city's also ceased its filter distribution program, and today thousands of households remain affected by dangerously high lead levels, many of whom don't even know it. And that's just one of the issues, as we all know. And I think this would all be high comedy if it weren't so terribly serious. But aside from that lead issue, we have a report here that's suggesting a list of options, restructuring options, as you phrased it, from sale to lease to new structures. But none of them are discussing what I believe to be the most obvious answer, which is under everyone's nose here, and that's to govern and to lead. This is precisely why we have city government. We need government and we need leadership. And if those are present, there would be appreciation for history, because of course we know that past is precedent. So to understand PWSA's present predicament, we have to understand PWSA's history. And from what I've seen, I believe much of this is absent in the report. From its inception in the mid-'80s to its bailout of the city in the mid-'90s, this city attempted to separate itself from the PWSA during this period. Yet in the mid to late 90s, took $100 million from the PWSA into the city coffers. So this authority structure that we have was used to prop up the city's budget while saddling the city at the same time with debt, and then subsidizing private water for a third of the city residents. Finding an irresponsible solution for immediate problems of the city at that time created new problems that were allowed to fester and have now come home to roost. I can't see how the situation we have here today is any different. And so frankly to me, that our discussion is around restructuring in any form is completely missing the major point here. And if you look at this report, at what has been missed and mismanaged, how does anything here proposed change that? What we need is very, very clear. We need government. We need leadership. We have to give the people straight talk, and we have to own up with very clear answers and timelines. To be very frank, that's why any of us, myself included, are elected. It's why we elect a mayor, to lead and to govern. We shouldn't have additional layers upon layers of responsibility that need to be peeled back and explained, just like in that movie, The Big Short. We have to be straight with the people of Pittsburgh. We have everything in our current power to do this work, but we have to be honest. So I'm very curious if I will hear any answer today, and I'm looking forward to it. If anyone can say to me why we cannot do this work in the current structure with a city government that, frankly, by that same scenario, transferred assets to a non-governmental entity. So let's not repeat the failures of the past. Let's make sure we keep this public and run it as it is supposed to be by a responsible city government. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Vincent Kolb?
I'm Dr. Vincent Kolb, the pastor of Sixth Presbyterian Church. Our congregation is a part of PIN, the Pennsylvania Interfaith Impact Network, a coalition of 30 congregations from a variety of faiths who represent every part of the city that PWSA serves. Early this year, a coalition of community groups, including PIN, kicked off the Our Water campaign. To date, our efforts to work for safe, affordable, and public water in Pittsburgh have been successful only because we have had access to a public board of a public authority. Despite tremendous financial and political pressure, our mayor has promised not to privatize the authority, and we have stood with him every step of the way, and we will continue to stand with him. Our deep concern today is that the key architect of the Reagan administration's Commission on Privatization is here today in Pittsburgh, shaping the future of our water authority, an entity that is known nationally as being an expert in implementing public-private partnerships. We think public-private is a misnomer. It is really private-public. 4 of the 7 options presented at the meeting were some form of privatization that includes a profit motive. I'm speaking specifically of the 10 to 15-year O&M contract, the long-term lease concession, the private for-profit transfer, and the selected service outsourcing. In the booklet that was handed out, many of the pro-privatization articles are written and funded by private water companies themselves who have a clear self-interest in promoting that agenda. We have no agenda in the Our Water campaign other than to protect the health and the safety of Pittsburgh residents. PWSA belongs to us, and you are all accountable to us. We will not let control of our water be sold off again. We know what happened last time when Veolia was involved. All of the faith traditions in PIN affirm that water is a gift from on high and not a product to be commodified. Public water is not for sale, and our communities and our citizens will not be sold a bill of goods. Our nation was founded on the premise that taxation without representation is tyranny. We are here to say that privatization without representation is tyranny as well, and we will not stand for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Kolb. Next up, Jamila Lakujan. Sorry. Correct me on that last, I apologize. You can call me Akaline if you like.
My name is Jamila Lahidruddin.
Thank you.
I am representing the Hill District Consensus Group and the Our Water campaign. Reverend Kolb said that we would not let control of our water authority be taken away again. And we say again because it already happened once. And it's important to remember what got us here, and the people of Pittsburgh did not break PWSA. PWSA is broken because big banks took advantage of our water authority and sold us credit default swaps that resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in debt that Pittsburgh residents now have to bear. PWSA is broken because our politicians carelessly gave away control of our authority to a French water company, Veolia. PWSA was broken because Veolia, a multinational corporation, made a profit off of every dollar that they saved for PWSA. They imposed dangerous cost cuts measures that have likely resulted in the lead crisis we are dealing with now. And Veolia did nothing to right that ship. They only made things worse, and Veolia walked away, taking with them $11 million in profit. The public-private partnership we had with Veolia is actually similar to the one in Indianapolis, where they spent $29 million to terminate their contract with Veolia because of billing and labor concerns. We're glad that folks from Indianapolis are here today to talk about their recent experience with public restructuring after the privatization option failed them so badly. I cannot in good conscience stand by and watch this blue ribbon panel be told that privatization or public-private partnerships are viable options to fix PWSA. Our public-private partnerships with Veolia taught us that introducing a profit motive into our water system will never work for the people of Pittsburgh. And no matter who the company, profits will always be prioritized over the needs of Pittsburgh's residents. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, for the initial comment period, we have Crystal Fort Wagner.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Dr. Crystal Fortwangler. I've been a professor of sustainability and natural resources for about the past 10 years and only recently transitioned into filmmaking. I'm also a resident of Pittsburgh. I was told over a year ago that my water had 24.6 parts per billion lead, and I haven't been able to use my water since then. I've been in constant communication with my elected officials to address this. In my professional opinion, I think and have studied enough to understand that public systems are what is in the best interest for the public. And my time is short. I'm going to give you one story that's affecting me right now to bring this real. I have been doing my research in the U.S. Virgin Islands for the past 20 years. They were completely wiped off the map in the past few days with Hurricane Irma. And who's there and who's going to be there is the elected officials and the public government who's going to have the back of those people there, not any private company who's elected is going to back those people. And that's what I need from the city of Pittsburgh. Right now for me, I haven't had water I can use for over a year, and I'm paying double, right? I pay for my filters, I pay for my bottled water, and I pay PWSA every month. I need my elected officials in this city to have my back, because when it comes down to it, that is who's going to have my back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the initial comments. Very important to hear, again, for the panels from outside the city as well. So just to let you know, there will be another comment section at the end of the conclusion, so make sure to take notes and ask questions. Again, Steve, back to you, but I think we're going to kick it off with Dan Evans, who is here with us from Indianapolis, from the Citizens Energy Group Board of Trustees. Mr. Evans?
I also wanted to add that at the end of Lauren and Dan's presentations today, there'll be a third presentation, and that will be from Tony Hernandez with regard to our ongoing assessment of the finances and information technology and internal controls at PWSA.
I didn't catch the county controller's first name. I apologize for that. But Reverend Pohl and Jamila and Crystal, I heard every word that you just said. Thank you for saying what you said. I've been in many such meetings, especially on lead and public health issues. I'm the very recently retired CEO of Indiana University Health. We spent a lot of time talking about these very issues, especially the lead issues in Indiana, which is very similar to Pennsylvania in terms of the age of the homes and the age of the infrastructure. In fact, I read on the way in here that Pittsburgh was established in 1816, Indianapolis 1821. So I have a feeling that our infrastructures are nearly identical. We have the same CSO issue. So here's the reason I say that. If you were in Indianapolis with the jobs that you currently have, the Board of Trustees of Citizens Energy would view you as the beneficiaries of the trust. So we've got a unique ownership and governance structure which is complicated but not really complex. By that I mean, once you've got it in your head, it's not one of these weird off-the-chart things. I am chairman, president's my actual title, but I'm president of the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees sit on top of a trust, which is a perpetual public charitable trust, meaning it can only do one thing: return all the value created by the operation of the utilities which we operate to the inhabitants or the residents of Indianapolis. That's the only thing we can do. We operate a water company, which I'll talk about in just a second, a gas company, a steam company, a chilled water company, the sewer company, storage facilities, above ground tanks, below ground tanks, and the infrastructure that's associated with all of those. The model has existed since 1882. So it's been a very durable model. It was established by the community, and I was sitting here watching you all present and looking at the panel. I'll bet it was a meeting pretty much like this. The enemy in 1882 was John D. Rockefeller and the domination by East Coast financiers of the energy market in the Midwest. Indiana is a hot area for underground natural gas. So you can see what arose between the two. So the business leaders and the community leaders in 1882 decided to establish a trust to own it. The hallmark of a trust is the fiduciary duty is simply to the people who are the beneficiaries. In our case, those folks are the inhabitants of Marion County, which is Indianapolis. So rather than go through all these slides, I refer the Blue Ribbon Commission to page 9, 10, and 11, and 12. Those are the ones that discuss governance. My colleagues from Tulsa will have a lot to say about efficiency and operations as well as governance, but because we are not a for-profit corporation, we have no shareholders, our indebtedness is on the bond market of publicly rated debt. We have none of the instruments that were discussed just a second ago from The Big Short, a movie that my wife and I watched, by the way, and interesting. So, I'm chairman of the Board of Trustees. My only job is to appoint the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors are responsible for operating the company. I am self-perpetuating, along with my other members. We're totally apolitical. I don't know what the politics, other than I know them personally, but there is no political litmus test. The mayor does not appoint the board. The city council does not appoint the board. The Board of Trustees are self-perpetuating, and our job is to appoint the Board of Directors who serve for 1 year and can be removed for no cause. The Board of Trustees can only be removed for cause, which would be by a court of competent jurisdiction. So if we breached our fiduciary duty, such as diverting profits to some particular place that we shouldn't, or not returning the profits to the inhabitants of Marion County, we would be replaced. Maybe that's happened sometime in the past, I don't know. We're required by law to be inhabitants of Indianapolis, and the moment that we cease being inhabitants of Indianapolis, we are off the board that instant. In other words, it is folks who live in the community and are therefore trustees as well as beneficiaries. You can see the Venn diagram up there that sort of collapses the idea of a private business and local ownership into an alternate approach. That's what Citizens Energy Trust is. So we are subject to the open door and public records law. The compensation of every employee is publicly available. You could Google it today. I presume I have recently, through the local newspaper, maintains the database of them. Because our core business prior to acquiring the water company was a gas company, it means our core competency is underground pipes. So think about leaks in underground pipes that carry gas. The consequences of that are catastrophic. So the leakage from underground gas pipes is de minimis. And when there's a problem, it's sort of like calling 911. They are resolved immediately. Water companies traditionally have not been managed that way. Pittsburgh has, I didn't know this till a couple of days ago, a 50% loss in water. So back to affordability, that means that people are paying twice to have water delivered to their house of what it actually is being used by local citizens. If that were happening in Indianapolis, the Board of Trustees would be saying to the Board of Directors, what's going on? This is a catastrophic outcome and a sign of gross inefficiency in some way that we don't understand. Now, the root cause of that is gas is inherently dangerous, water is not, so you can see how you might defer maintenance for water when you wouldn't for gas. The next slide lays out in some detail. I'm a lawyer by training, although I haven't practiced law in a long time, so I couldn't help myself putting in the citations for the folks in the audience that want to Google the statutory citations and the case, the Todd case, which is 1931. That's the case that recognized the trust as perpetual. We view our duty as owning the assets, not selling the assets. We can only sell the assets if it becomes impossible to perform our purpose. So that has not happened. If for some reason natural gas or water became impossible to collect, purify, and deliver, then we'd have the opportunity to change the purpose of the trust. The Board of Trustees are paid $50 a year, so there's nobody on the Board of Trustees who's on it for money. Last comment. The hallmark of our organization is being apolitical. Apolitical is different than non-political. Apolitical means that politics do not play a role in our decisions. Trust law does, which means we have to remain constantly focused on our purpose, which is to return all benefit to the inhabitants of Marion County. Our system's about 3 times bigger than the Pittsburgh system, so that was a bit of an aha moment for me, meaning we have more customers to spread the cost base over than Pittsburgh has, and we own some of the utilities outside of the city that are high growth areas, so we can generate revenues for those. So our portfolio of utilities is bigger than yours, so inherently there'd be a lower cost of delivering water, gas, steam, chilled water, and so forth, and so on. The board governance structures on the next page. This is the confusing part, and I'll stand down right after. Well, all of this can be a little confusing. Even though we're a public charitable trust, we operate as a department of the city. It's just that the city doesn't control what we do. The board of directors controls what we do. So all the laws that would pertain to a department of the city also pertain to us. It's just that the actual governance and management structure is independent of the city. The vision of the founders of Citizens Energy in 1882, Colonel Eli Lilly and his colleagues, was to have a holding company for all necessary public utilities, to keep them out of some of the very things you talked about before I'm speaking right now, to make sure that the profit motive and folks who were not interested in the best interests of the inhabitants of Marion County didn't have control over essential utilities. It wasn't until the last several years, 2011 I think, that we acquired the water company. Up until the time the water company was owned by the city in the 90s, it was an investor-owned utility in central Indiana, and had been there since 1862 or 1863. So it's an old urban facility. The source of the water is the river that runs through town and the canal system that was built to transport merchandise in the 1830s, and of course the canal system failed because of the invention of the railroad. So in any event, the water company is an ancient institution. So we acquired the water company a couple of years ago, and we had to do, and I won't say much about this because my colleague from Tulsa will have much more to say. We found the water company in need of efficient management and benchmarking what it was doing, dashboarding how it was actually performing, seeing what the value was that was being returned to the ratepayer, actually measuring the deferred maintenance, so we had some idea what it was going to cost to get it to a more efficient operating modality. We have, I think, about a 15% water loss rate in Indianapolis. That's too high. We'd like to be in the mid to low single digits. And we're an old system like you. Our newer systems in the suburbs, of course, have a much lower loss rate. We, like you, are concerned about lead. We have in our employ the same fellow, the scientist from Virginia Tech that worked on the Flint, Michigan issue, so we're very concerned about that. Indiana is just Pittsburgh, further west in terms of the age of the infrastructure and the kind of the industries that existed there. So with that, I will stand down. Thank you very much.
Great. Dan, if you just want to stay where you are right now, what we'd like to do for the next 20 minutes is give the panel an opportunity to ask some questions of Dan, whether it be structure, the problems that were faced. It was a recent acquisition from the city in favor of the trust, which is, again, a public charitable trust, but I want to spend some time to give panel members the opportunity to ask questions before we turn it over to Tulsa. So, if there are any questions, go ahead. Dr. Cohen?
Got lots of questions. It's really interesting, and thank you again, Mr. Evans, for going the trouble of being here. It's very valuable to us. So I'm new to this, the structural issues and governance issues that you put before us. And this phrase, public charitable trust, is that a universal phrase? Do we have that in Pennsylvania?
There are public charitable trusts in Pennsylvania.
There are, okay.
In fact, a very famous one in Philadelphia dealing with art. And the concept of cypre was finally applied to it because the art
That's
collection.
the Barnes.
Yeah, because the artwork was put in a building that was falling apart.
Right.
And the courts finally ruled in a lawsuit brought by the Philadelphia Museums that this famous Impressionist art was going to be destroyed. So cypre is the legal doctrine of it's become impossible to perform the settlor's intentions. So what the doctor tried to do was invent a tool to keep this artwork in perpetuity available for study by serious folks. and he wasn't able to fund the building. So they do exist. Now, I think there are a few public utilities that have a similar, but not many. Not many.
Okay. But a lawyer in Pennsylvania would know what I was talking about.
A
if I said
Philadelphia
public
lawyer
charge
would
trust.
know how to do this.
I beg to differ, so do Pittsburgh voters. Plenty in the room.
Just two more questions on structure and finances. So, Board of Trustees over the whole thing, Board of Directors. Now, does each utility have its own Board of Directors? Or is
No,
there
the Board
one
of Directors
for-
has divided itself to be responsible for utilities by committee.
By
And the
committee.
statute, that was contemplated in the original statute, that, look, one of these days we're going to run multiple utilities, and so therefore we're going to have expertise. These are very complex enterprises, so the board has divided itself, and we oversee that to make sure there's a board, there's an executive committee of the board for water, an executive committee of the board for gas, for chilled water, for steam. The meetings, as I said, are in public, and so they're very organized about each of these areas. So at the last meeting, for instance, the main topic was, and you'll hear this from Tulsa, was about efficiencies. Are we really generating the efficiency we need across all these utilities? So I'll give you an example. The steam and chilled water use the same pipes, and they burn garbage to make the steam. So in the winter we make steam, in the summer we make chilled water. That's a very old system, and you've got that here in Philadelphia with the downtown thermal heating system. It has a few customers, but they're big customers. So that's an interesting business and requires its own focus. The gas, until recently, remember it was $13 a therm, now it's $2 or $3 a therm, and we were all worried whether or not we'd have enough gas. Now it's displaced oil. No one predicted that, so we used to store underground to make sure we had enough for winter. So a big cost was underground storage in southern Indiana in big old mines. So that need went away, and we were able to move quickly on that. We had liquefied natural gas in those big storage things where the roofs go up and down, up and down. So the board divided itself into committees that could develop the necessary lay expertise to oversee it, and they come together.
But the
for the
fiduciary responsibility and authority rests with the Board of Directors and the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, the board of
For all the
directors.
utilities.
Yes, the board of directors can organize itself in any way that they deem appropriate, and then we measure their outcomes. Have they succeeded in keeping rates as low as they can be? Have they succeeded in running, in the gas in particular, a safe system? Because we do have explosions.
Sure.
Things do happen. Is the CSO being mitigated consistent with the EPA consent decree? Is it, I didn't mention this, I live within sight of the river in which the CSO flows. It's in my neighborhood. I have CSO in our home. So this is not an academic consideration for us.
One more question. Can money be moved, in quotes, from one utility to another, i.e., can you subsidize water rates with the surplus from the gas utility, for example?
We have to account for the regulated utilities separately. There are shared services between all of them. So the efficiency, we own the shared services, like accounts receivable, legal, pipes in the ground stuff, but they do have to be accounted for separately. So the ratepayers in Westfield, Indiana, aren't paying the cost of gas in Indianapolis, Indiana, or water, or vice versa. The commodity costs, they have to be separated by Indiana state law. Our biggest concern right now, well, lots of concerns, but a major concern right now is, because we own all the utilities except electric and cable, is share of wallet. What is this actually costing people altogether? How much of their home income are we taking from them, and how can we spread out the cost in a way that minimizes it to those that are least able to pay? This is going to take statutory changes, because the law, I don't know about Pennsylvania, but I wouldn't be surprised if the law in Pennsylvania is you can only have one rate class for residential. You can't have 10 or 15. So we tried in our last rate case to lower the rates for poorer neighborhoods and increase the rate for richer neighborhoods, and our Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission denied that request. So we're going to have to come up with a statutory scheme to do the same thing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yep. Just for sake of argument, we could accept that this charitable trust is a kind of an entity that could work, okay? My concern with kind of where we are is we have $800 million in debt. We have poor quality water, if you listen to the community. We have poor record keeping. We're keeping records on 3x5 cards on maintenance. We're losing 50% of our water. We've got issues with employees. I'm not sure I would want to turn over a new plan to our current organization, even regardless if you change the moniker it operates under. How do we get to, a stronger enterprise? How do we improve all of our systems? How do we change our processes? And what kind of management can we attract to do that? Because clearly we cannot, if we all agree on what the plan is going to be, we can't deliver a $2 billion plant to our current entity and expect to get a different result.
Well, obviously, you've asked the big question, and my colleague who will follow me will deal with some of the issues that you've just discussed. But I can tell, I've been outside lawyer, inside lawyer, trustee, director, litigant. I've stood in the well of rooms like this on behalf of the trust. The vision of the trust is to return value to the inhabitants of Marion County, period. So that directs the efforts. Everything is directed at that thing. So that unifies the workforce to have a common vision. It's not horse you know what, it's what. So the question always is, before we do something, how is that of value to Mrs. Jones? So that's number one. Number two, we had a leg up in acquiring the water company because the core business of the trust was an underground pipes company. So that's what you're really asking, is how do you suddenly get all kinds of expertise? You have to pay for it. So we do not pay government salaries. Our market basket of salary comparators for everybody is a mixed basket. In other words, we have investor-owned and municipals and proprietary that might be private. A lot of subdivisions, it's proprietary. It's owned by a private individual in a subdivision. And we assiduously, and you'll hear this from Tulsa, measure everything. Red, yellow, green. How we doing? So I would strongly encourage you, whenever you take whatever the next step is, that you make sure that across the transom is the expertise. So before we did the acquisition, Tulsa did the same thing. Did a pretty thorough due diligence. The due diligence was mostly accurate, but it wasn't 100% accurate. We found, once we became operating, more problems than had been found in the due diligence period, but it wasn't a holy cow sort of thing. So that's the shortest answer I can give it. That's another that's another meeting, and obviously that was one of the primary interests of the mayor of Indianapolis and the city council and the CDCs, which I take it is represented in this room in a different way, the community development corporations, the neighborhoods. So we relied heavily on the neighborhoods and Reverend Pohl and on the faith community. So you'll see on our board of trustees here, on one of these slides, we have a couple of pastors on the board of trustees because they actually happen to be closest to the neighborhoods that we serve and have been. Brian Williams, you'll see him on it. He was the pastor of a Methodist church in the middle of one of our neighborhoods. He's now a program officer at Lilly Endowment, helping people manage just these things in CDCs. So we involved the neighborhoods. And that was our compromise when Senator Lugar was mayor of Indianapolis. The neighborhood associations became a necessary stop point to evaluate any effort to take a core municipal service and do it in a different way. And I think we've been successful at that, in Indianapolis anyway.
Michelle?
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time here. I have a question getting back to the structure. You had indicated earlier that the board of directors essentially has operations oversight and related to management, and that the board of trustees essentially oversees that board of directors in terms of appointments and such that are made, and that they do more of the measurement in terms of the dashboard and goals that you all create. What type of decision making comes from the board of trustees? Can you give us some examples of what they would do from that perspective?
So the Citizens creates an annual report. An annual report has the vision at the top, and then it has the tactical tools to get there, and then what the goals are, what the current state is and what the desired state is. It's there. And then we measure how far we are on the journey from whatever our current state is to our desired state. And then we measure the boards, whether or not we'll reappoint the board, on how far they are on that journey. So we evaluate their performance in the last year. So I can't think of a good analogy, and I don't want to use shareholders voting in an annual meeting, because this is an ongoing evaluation, and our statutory meeting is annually. But what the trustees are interested in is, are we discharging our fiduciary duty through meeting the purposes of the trust? Purposes of the trust are to return value to the inhabitants of Marion County. So how do we measure that? We measure that by rates, safety, quality, customer satisfaction, which went down after we acquired the water company for the reasons you just described. We had different IT systems, so a customer would call, and what would happen? They get dropped, they get the wrong data, so we went through a blip trying to get legacy systems to talk to each other on the service side. We used to have a big customer service center downtown. Most of our customers, 90%, don't live downtown, so we had to figure out a way to disperse that. The meter readers basically are customer service people too. They're actually going to people's homes, and they can see what's going on in those homes. So it's narrow. We're overseeing the work of the directors who, remember, they just serve a one-year term, and they're at will. We don't have to have a reason to get rid. The trustees are not at will. We can only be removed for cause. So if there's some debate, we could make a harder decision. We could say we want the company to spend this much of its resources in this particular area, but we've not had that issue. So I go to some of the board of directors meetings. I read all of the material that the board of directors gets, but mostly I'm an outcomes guy. So maybe the principal's office, who's actually looking at this? Did you attend class every day, or did you get an A in that class or a C? I don't want to trivialize it, but it's that granular. So,
Other questions, Jen?
To follow up on Michelle's question, I'm sorry if I missed this, but how is the Board of Trustees selected?
Well, I think in 1882 it was selected by Colonel Lilly and his friends and the mayor at the time, but today it's self-perpetuating. So we elect ourselves.
I see. Understood.
Yeah, and then we present our resolution to the mayor, who in his ministerial capacity signs the
Okay.
resolution. He could object and go to court and get one of us replaced for cause, which I think would be if we really performed badly on the outcomes end, or we didn't show up for meetings or something like that.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So I heard you say the primary benefits, apolitical, the benefit accrues to the public, inures to the public, long-term focus. Other ones that you want to highlight to us of the structure?
Well, we can make hard decisions. We have a coke plant. Used to make coking coal. You got lots of coke plants around here because of the steel plants. Coke plants, byproducts are benzene and hydrochloric acid, right, Professor? There's nothing good about the byproducts of them. So we had to make decisions. Do we close the coke plant, and do we put some of our resources into remediation that might go into rate reduction? Those are hard decisions. There's a neighborhood around the coke plant that we care a lot about. The coke plant's been there since 1906. So, we've got, Indiana's a little like Western Pennsylvania. There are lots of Superfund sites, so there's a high level of sophistication with dealing with these things. But I think we've encouraged the board to come up with these metrics and tools. Workforce issues, are your employees satisfied? Are your customers satisfied? And then we just monitor those things so we have some evidence that the benefit's being returned to the.
So when I hear current state, future state, I think process improvement. Do you do internal process improvement, or do you have an outside consultant that's helped you with the process improvement? How do you structure sort of the continual process improvement?
Well, for years and years, we used Baldrige as our checklist. So especially the paragraphs on leadership. And we, in the later years, scored very high on that. And I personally thought there was a correlation between knowledge transfer scoring on the leadership quadrant and the outcomes with respect to efficiency, that it wasn't a coincidence that you could describe how knowledge was transferred. So let's talk about the water company and the gas company. So I say we're an underground pipe company. How is that knowledge transferred? So that would be process improvement. How is the knowledge transferred? So we do have a continual improvement process. It's maturing. Utilities in general are behind the private sector and some governmental sectors. You know, Baldrige is now given to many 501c3s and government units, and the hospital that I used to run is a 501c3 that owns public buildings. And so we've used a mix of the two. We did Baldrige without being judged. We did Baldrige internally and then hired de facto judges rather than go for the award, and then use process improvement as the tactic to create the knowledge that we would then transfer someplace else and then replicate it. So a process improvement. But think about supply chain. You know, that's kind of low-hanging fruit in some instances. In some instances, it's not. But if you're manufacturing coking coal or transporting an inherently dangerous product or purifying water to put in somebody's body, then the level of verification has to be high.
Other questions? Yeah, Dr. Cohen? Oh, sorry, David.
Sorry, David. So if a city resident is unhappy with their water service and they call the mayor's office or their city council member's office, what does the mayor say? It's not my problem? Go.
No.
What?
No.
So what is the relationship?
That's a good question. We view the city council and the mayor's office as key stakeholders in our rubric of how we're organized. So the mayor has a hotline. I presume the mayor of Pittsburgh has a hotline, and so lots of people call the hotline when their water smells. This time of year, in the hot time, you know, algae grows in the water. They put various things in it to kill it, and so your water may come out of the tap and smell. So the mayor will get a bunch of calls, low pressure. And so if my cell phone weren't dead, I'd show it to you right now. But I get emails sometimes all day long about the communications back, you must get them too, back and forth between the mayor's office and the utility. Are we responding fast enough to this or that? With the water company, it's main breaks in the hot summer and sometimes in the winter, but in the hot summer. And then 2 years ago, I don't know about Pittsburgh, we had a drought. So we had to ask for voluntary rationing, which was controversial. That is, some elected office holders wanted rationing and some elected office holders didn't want rationing, voluntary rationing, and some didn't want it. We made it voluntary, and most citizens complied. We can measure compliance pretty much by micro neighborhoods, so we knew, and there was pretty much community-wide compliance, but there are adjacent communities that didn't have a shortage. So their yards were green, and this caused cognitive dissonance at various levels of government. So as a result, we're building an additional reservoir near Indianapolis in an old quarry, which is much more efficient than building a new reservoir. We have 2 watersheds that come in.
Yeah, but just to nail this down, you consult with and communicate with the elected officials, but they have no
Daily.
authority or control over the trust.
Yeah, when we say stakeholder, we mean someone who, under Baldrige, would actually be a core customer, although we call our customers the inhabitants of Marion County, but a stakeholder is someone to whom we believe we have a duty of satisfying. So if the mayor's hotline calls us and says we got a complaint at 71st and Meridian Street, the main drag in town, that is taken pretty seriously. And we've had a lot of calls about the CSO stuff as the water companies put in these lift stations in people's yards. There are a lot of them, thousands of them. So that's expected. We expect calls from the city, and we appreciate it.
David?
I'm just trying to get my head around this. So I think one of our biggest issues, as I think about the PWSA, is the fact that our board is, for various reasons, not as focused on the health, quality water, caring about the customers, having that mission statement that you've been very clear at getting through this trust structure. So I mean, I guess maybe I'm simplifying it, but if the PWSA board decided that their number one goal was the health and value, the health of the residents and the high quality water, other than changing the structure, we get to the same place. The advantage is that the trust is governed by trust law, and that gives you a certain advantage that we wouldn't have in a public utility.
I can't be a judge of what's happened to the past to where you've gotten here, but it seems to me whatever you've done in the past has failed.
Oh, yeah, that's a fact.
So that whatever you do in the future needs to be a different construct that's evidence-based, evidence-based, not your opinion, evidence-based. And so I think what you're doing today is try to create the evidence, and then you be the judge of whether or not a change in governance model would make a difference.
But we probably wouldn't, as I said, we probably wouldn't be in this position if the PWSA board had had a mission like your trust board from 1880 whatever, right? 1882. I mean, you've been lucky that you've had this great board that has had this ability to kind of do this. And you said the trust law helped you because it's been governed by trust law, which means you're only true to your mission and that's it, right? There's no financial, there's no, as you said, and then you give it to the board of, the board of directors reports to you. Okay. So this isn't so much a question as I'm just trying to figure out.
No, I get, believe me, I've had to describe this.
Yeah, and the Citizens Energy Group is a public utility.
Citizens Energy Group is a DBA of the trust. We could change the name tomorrow.
Okay.
The actual, if you looked at the bonds,
Yep.
they would say Department of Public Utilities of the Consolidated City of Indianapolis. The Department of Public Utilities is the statutory thing that the trust controls.
The Citizens Energy Group is a nonprofit?
Yes.
Gotcha. So there's no profit motive there either.
It's not a 501c3, it's a governmental entity.
Understood.
So we have the transparency of a governmental entity, but we don't file a 990, but everybody's salaries and all are, and because we're regulated by the IURC, you can get on this afternoon and read the pre-filed testimony of the water case, and there have been rate cases in the last 3 or 4 years that would tell you, well, and you can be your own judge. I always get on and read what the minimum charges are, any place I'm at, to just see what it is people are paying for that they're not getting.
So for us, the CEO of the Citizens Energy Group would become the CEO of, that's the PWSA, and then we would have a board of directors of the PWSA like we have now, and the thing we're adding here is a board of trustees of this trust that would have this clear mission, health of our citizens, and giving value back to the citizens via the Water and Sewer Authority, and that's it.
Let me say one more thing before I leave, because I do have a plane in a few minutes. Did you know there's a nonstop flight from Pittsburgh to Indianapolis? I did. Yeah, yeah, that's good. Well, good. Thank you. Thank you. My brother told me about it, and it actually worked this morning. There were 6 of us on the plane. The plane only held 7, but it was great. So, utilities are complicated businesses. There's nothing simple about it. They involve international trade. They involve regulations that are related to the byproducts of running a utility. They deal with public health issues. We've talked about the lead issue today. It's a very serious issue. So you have this domains, in my opinion. So the domain of public health, the domain of a public utility, and the domain of public safety all come together in a Venn diagram, in my mind. And I view myself as the trustee as responsible for where they all overlap. I couldn't do that if I only did this for a year or two and then got replaced. So the expertise is there. Now, the risk to that is you get somebody in that you can only get out for cause. Getting somebody out for cause is hard to do, but we are not nose in, hands with, that is not us. The trustees are outcome oriented.
The board is the
board, we hold the board accountable for the outcome. So sometimes our board meetings, I wouldn't say they're uncomfortable, but they're pointed. You know, explain to us this, like the question about efficiency. So what exactly do you mean? Do you mean Lean Six Sigma? Because we're not the Subaru plant in Lafayette. Do you mean Eli Lilly with pharma, where you're making human life things? I mean, what do you mean Dow AgroSciences? They're all right there within walking distance. And no, we mean something else. We mean delivering a scarce commodity through a distribution system that's a mix of you own the service pipe, right? This is the hardest thing for folks to understand, but the utility owns the mains and connections. So where's that lead actually getting in? Then in our cities, the poorer neighborhoods don't have vegetation next to the homes and between the sidewalk and the street. So the soil is lead contaminated, and not from the water, but from the paint flaking off the house and 50 years of gasoline engines. So South Bend, Indiana's done a couple of census tract studies and found that kids who live in houses that have vegetation up against the house are less likely to have signs of high parts per million of lead than the kids who live in houses where they play in the dirt. In fact, I just met with someone from Notre Dame University, and this is her area of expertise, and I said, well, this is a bigger problem than the water pipes. We know those, so how do we deal with this if this is true? She said, we've only done 1 census tract. So you can see that's the public health issue. I happen also to be the vice chairman of the States of Indiana's Opioid Drug Abuse Commission. So what you see is how all of this starts to overlap and focus on how and where people live. So the utilities make it possible for neighborhoods to be affordable and stable. Detroit, you cannot have a neighborhood with one customer on the block. Your infrastructure costs cannot be borne by one person on the block. So I read the Detroit Free Press every day just for centering myself. The streetlights in Detroit were off until recently because you can't light a whole street if you only have one person who needs it. So that's stranded investment. I don't know what Pittsburgh's amount of stranded investment is, but we worry about Indianapolis as certain neighborhoods depopulate and certain neighborhoods repopulate. There's sort of this urbanization, gentrification is not the right word, but people moving into certain, our center township, which is the actual core of the city, has lost, in my lifetime, 6 figures of population and is just now going back the other direction. So we've had to maintain, so how much of that is causing inefficiencies that people are paying for a few blocks away? So this is a pretty sophisticated analysis, and we expect the board of directors to be aware of that and to plan accordingly.
So we have time for one more question, Michelle.
Just a quick question about those who work for Citizens Energy Group. Are they all employed by Citizens, or do you actually have outsourcing and consulting services within as well?
I presume they're outsourcing. I mean, I was outside counsel, so I'd be an outsourced person. And the pipe company, there are outsourced pipe companies because it's bigger than they could maintain on their own, but it's been the same one for 40 or 50 years. So there are, but the core services, human resources, supply chain, financial services, accounts receivable and collectible, customer service are internal, because part of it is the customer culture. They don't think they can outsource. So, and I agree with that. So I spent one day as a young lawyer working the phones. And what I learned was the ladies who answer the phones are social workers. Basically, they're solving problems, especially for the gas company. So your gas has been cut off, and it's March 16th. I may be wrong. The law doesn't permit us to cut the gas off before March 16th. Any place. Wintertime, you can't cut the gas off. But after that, you can. So the people who are actually working, answering the phones, they're dealing with real live problems. So I became so fascinated by it, I spent a day with a bill collector on the road, going from house to house. It was, for me, a middle-class guy, it was super eye-opening. So we need countermeasures to help people deal with the reality of an essential public service that they need, whether they have the money that day or not. So these house fires that occur are usually overloaded circuits. Well, I shouldn't say usually. They're frequently overloaded circuits where there's been some issue with respect to paying some other utility bill. And we go back and forth whether we should send people a bill for everything together, then it looks real big, or divide it up into water, sewer, and so forth. Then it's the same bill, it just doesn't look as big. So how do we act? So we provide a lot of customer service. And there's a warm heart fund where we pay people. That's where my $50 a year goes into that. Louis Endowment gives money to it. The township trustees do. And so what I've noticed over the course of my career with Citizens is the affordability index has generally gone down. So you got to figure out a way to deal with the fact. The good news is the cost of gas has gone down dramatically. The cost of delivering gas has not, because the pipes have not gone down in their cost.
Just one final thought here, guys, and appreciate we can do follow-up conversation. Did someone on the phone wanted to? You put the microphone. Hold on 1 second.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, this is David Miller, and I have 2 questions, but they're interrelated. First, could you explain to us what self-perpetuating Board of Trustees means? That suggests to me how a trustee would get replaced. And then secondly, the degree to which you make selections for the Board of Directors, how much is the demographic and social characteristics of the city and the customer base reflected in the Board of Directors? And here's how these 2 questions are connected. As I looked at both the extraordinarily impressive credentials of the Board of Trustees and of the Board of Directors, I saw very heavy corporate influence. And so I'm wondering, to what degree do you try to take into account the representativeness of both the trustees and the board of directors in its membership?
Good question. Self-perpetuating means just that, the plain language. The Board of Trustees is self-perpetuating. We nominate ourselves to succeed ourselves. We're limited by age. I think it's 70 is the age limit. And if we don't live in Marion County, Indiana, which is Indianapolis, we cannot serve. So we've had that happen, where folks have retired and they've moved out. As to, and I got to say, I think if you look at the trustees, you'll see some diversity in the trustees. I've personally worked very hard at that. I referred to a couple of them by name, and they live in all different parts of the city. As to the board of directors, we'd like to have more diversity, and we do have diversity in it, but what we create a matrix. And the matrix across the top is the skills and the things we're looking for, and down the left-hand column is the incumbents. So if we lose somebody, and we're about to lose one member who's on it, she lives in a certain part of the city, and she's an African-American, and she's been on the board a long time. So she's a huge loss. So to replace her is going to be tough, but we're looking for someone like her that represents the city and represents the neighbors. She ran a safety net hospital on the Near East Side of town. I know something about that, so she knows, she deals with poverty and access to essential services, Anita. So we just create a matrix and we ask for nominations.
Right. So just to follow up, and I appreciate your time and great questions. It seems to me that some of the benefits of a structure like this could be relating to the continuity of leadership. I mean, in effect, the trust structure is insulated from the public.
Yes.
I mean, you're accountable to a legal instrument and ultimately by a judge, which can be a good thing in terms of continuity. When mayors change, they change over boards. Some of those decisions are made politically. I know when we took office, there were a lot of folks who worked at PWSA who were not there by skill, but they were for political purposes, and that was very clear. We try to clean that up. But that also can be a con. So for example, when we took office, there was a conversation around the CSO, whether or not to pursue, which had been a gray infrastructure approach. So through a lot of collaboration of folks in this room, we staked a hard position that we felt that the response to the federal consent decree could be accomplished through a combination of green infrastructure, which not only was good for the environment, but also could leverage that same level of investment in communities where private investment didn't happen, thereby leveraging and building out the neighborhood in an equitable manner. That's a gray area that it seems to me the closer you are to the public through an accountable elected official really would drive a decision at an authority like PWSA that necessarily wouldn't be reflected in a trust structure where how do you interpret that decision when you're bound by a trust document. So help me understand, is there an analog example where truly you had a gray area policy decision that really didn't have to do with just delivering safe water, but it was a more broadly based policy decision? Would we be giving up that flexibility by pursuing a trust structure, for example? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the only issue that I can pull off the top of my head is when we decided to close the Coke plant. That's the equivalent of selling it, and it was a trust asset. So we were unsure whether or not we had the power, because we couldn't use the business judgment rule. We used so there's case law on this, and we decided to close it, figuring it was no risk, that who would object to that. Surely there are examples where we've gotten into a gray area and we haven't recognized it.
Well, that would be one of the things that I think the administration would like to pursue and understand how the benefits of a structure, the continuity I like, the fact that you have a board of trustees who has dealt with these issues for a long period of time, but it's by virtue it's undemocratic, and so how do you balance those?
We've consciously sought executive directors of community development corporations to serve on the board and have had them. And then they roll off and we find another one. You'll see by looking at the list that one of the people is the chief human resources office for the public hospital in town, Eskenazi Hospital. African
I
American.
believe there's someone on the phone who has a question.
Okay.
And there's one area, very, very, very important area that we have not covered in this presentation that I think we need to cover before we turn it over to Lauren.
Well, the other thing is, Kevin, if we could create some
Yes.
modality,
Hello?
we could get access to him
Yes, of course.
subsequent to the, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, is there a question? Who's on the phone? Is that Fred?
Yeah, this is Fred Brown. My question was similar, but I wanted to know, in the matrix, would it also take into account the social economic strata in addition to diversity? I think the other thing that's needed in this new structure is to ensure that there's people on the board that represent some of the stakeholders that have a difficult time dealing with pay increases, and that we increase their IQ around the causation with that, and so that there's a direct correlation with them having a deeper understanding that gets translated across different social economic strata. I understand the diversity question, but I also want to be sensitive that sometimes we use diversity and we find people of color that are equally academically strong and not socially strong. So I just want to, add that to the conversation regarding the matrix.
Thank you, Fred. We agree. Any other comments on that point? No. Okay. Steve, a final?
There are two large issues facing Pittsburgh, citizens of Pittsburgh, with regard to the water. We've covered one of them. We haven't covered the other. The first one is the quality of water. The second is the cost of water. The Citizens Energy Group is regulated by the Public Utility Commission, the same entity in Indiana that regulates investor-owned utilities. And their rate-making methodology is identical to that which is used for Citizens Energy. Can you comment about what that impact that regulatory structure has in terms of your being able to recover your necessary investments through higher rates?
Well, we view the IURC as a stakeholder, like we view the mayor's office and the council, so constant interaction with them is important. There's an office in the IURC called the OUCC, the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor, so they are always involved in each rate case, so there's a give and take. They represent the consumer. And rate cases end up in the final analysis either being negotiated, or the commission, you file a consent decree, or the commission makes a decision between the position of the OUCC and the position of whoever the petitioner are. And we have not had what I would consider to be difficulty in that regard. But we've not been, I don't think, aggressive in our rate increase requests. In Indiana, like Pennsylvania, you have to file pre-filed testimony, so it's all there. It's not an adversarial proceeding. The evidence is presented days, sometimes weeks, before the actual hearing.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dan.
Thank
Appreciate you
you.
being here.
Appreciate
Safe
it.
travels. Appreciate.
And Dan, I
Pamela's
just wanted to
comments.
add that my brothers, sisters, and nieces and nephews all drink your water, and they look pretty healthy to me.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Lauren Brookie, who's here with us from the Tulsa Metro Utilities Authority. Different structure, so Lauren, appreciate you being here today, and if you can give us a sense of your experience in Tulsa and how you've...
Lauren, can I invite you to sit?
You want to sit over this way?
Please, right here, in my seat,
Okay.
please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Just as a reminder, I serve on the Tulsa Metropolitan Utility Authority, and I recently, over the past 5 years, chaired the Utility Enterprise Initiative. With me is Eric Lee, who was the project manager on the staff side of that effort. So the things I'm going to do today, one, are to give you a short story that tells you how we arrived at our decision to not privatize the operation of water and wastewater treatment in the city of Tulsa. And secondly, the technical fixes we put in place. I'm a bit of a water nerd, so technical fixes will address, I believe, some of your questions as to how do you do improvement. And I enjoyed talking about the accomplishments we believe we've made in the last 5 years. So just as an orientation to our system, we have about 400,000 plus citizens in the Tulsa area, and we have 600,000 plus residents. We have 3 water sources, 2 water treatment plants, about 132,000 customer accounts, 2,300 miles of pipe, and we pump about 105 million gallons of water a day. The history of the decision for us to seek improvement in our system so that we would be prepared long-term for inevitable costs related to infrastructure as well as price rate increases starts with the situation we found ourselves in 2011 and 12 with a new mayor, a mayor very focused on small government, and a mayor very interested in solving an issue related to reduction in overall city general revenue due to a diminishing sales tax due to the economic considerations at the time. And as a result of that, he commissioned a study by KPMG, and the KPMG did what we, from the authority perspective, and we are a 7-member authority, including the mayor. We have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and we are leasing the system as an authority from the city of Tulsa. So they retain rights to the actual system.
Sorry, the mayor is a member of the board?
Correct. And also appoints the members. So the KPMG study recommended what we believe was a light study, sort of a flyover of opportunities for revenue generation out of city operations, recommended the sale of the water and wastewater treatment facility. During that time period, we'd been during about 10 years of no GO bond elections to support infrastructure investment. Our debt, particularly on the wastewater side, was increasing. And we had overall, as I mentioned earlier, depleted general revenue sources. In general terms, as citizens of Tulsa and as individuals responsible for the management of the authority, we believe strongly that privatization was not the right alternative for the city of Tulsa. But we didn't have the information or the analysis to support that general perspective of the authority, and we decided at that point that we would undertake a study, what we call the comprehensive assessment, to analyze indeed what would be the value or non-value of privatizing the citizens' public and water and wastewater treatment services and infrastructure. So from our viewpoint, we were dealing with public assets that had been funded by the public, and that was a level of value that superseded many considerations. We were challenged by the idea of privatizing or selling those assets and experiencing what we believe many cities across the country had also experienced, which was having to buy back their own assets, something that we found unfathomable. We wanted to understand what was the advantage from a private sector perspective of managing in that realm. So what advantages did they offer that our public management did not offer? So we undertook the comprehensive assessment, and we reviewed the following areas: governance and management, operations review, wastewater and capital needs assessment, future market opportunities, the financial condition we found ourselves in, strategic options we had for the future, and an analysis of what KPMG did and did not study in their recommendation for privatization. That overall assessment revealed what, in general terms, you probably in your current situation would consider to be some strong advantages. We had a loyal and experienced workforce that in general was not disgruntled. We had no fat in the system, but we did have a challenging debt ratio, and we had no in-place system for adequately assessing the condition of our assets and its value. We found ourselves facing support services which were expensive and higher percentage of budget than other systems. And finally, there was a general lack of understanding of what systems we were paying for, shared services we were paying for from the city of Tulsa. All of those issues, we believe, needed to be addressed in this overall assessment. Once this assessment was complete, we came to the conclusion that the margin of profit that a privatization solution would provide was really in an analysis of risk. So they would still have to have an employee base. They would still have to manage large infrastructure system, which in this case was probably under-maintained or not perfectly reliable. What was the margin that would make the difference on the private enterprise side? And we decided that the margin of risk was the margin we could operate in to be successful. How would we be able to take a fairly conservative system, bent on replacing things when they needed to be replaced, bent on reacting to problem areas versus planning and proactively assessing our system, would give us an opportunity to work in that margin of risk and thereby achieve some savings for the system. In order to do that, we had to first do an adequate assessment of our system, put asset management in place, do that with technology, support the system with significant technology, and third, set performance metrics, which we could be held accountable by the citizens of Tulsa, as well as the customers and city municipal leaders. So areas, and I go into now the technical fixes that we employed over a 5-year period following the assessment that were under the purview of the Utility Enterprise Initiative. We implemented a computerized maintenance management system, an asset management information system across utility. In other words, what was the current condition of our assets and what needed to be fixed first, and what was the business case scenario on a capital project by capital project for actually creating that fix and investing in that capital project. And that margin of risk, we assessed value to that risk. So what are the health impact? What are the cost impact? What are the stakeholder impacts for each of those capital projects? And we originally assessed 50 different capital projects to test our business case scenario, and we found that it held up well, and so then we have gone about implementing that business case scenario for capital improvement across our entire system. We had developed an asset management policy and framework within that work. We identified software that we needed in our system to catalog maintenance and repairs. We invested in the installation and the training of that system. So there are members of our authority who believed software isn't enough. It requires training your employees to use it adequately, and also identifying the business processes to be supported by that technology so that that technology actually is a true fix rather than a complication for the business process. We identified software to feed key performance data. We developed a strategic plan, which the staff today will tell you was a key factor in their estimation of our ability to achieve improvement over 5 years. The authority actually identified its own strategic plan and then created business processes to support that plan. And then finally, we began work on service level agreements. I mentioned earlier in my comments that we were paying for legal, HR, customer service services. What were we paying for and how much were we paying for them, and how did that compare with other systems, both private and public sector? And then finally, we are looking now at, and are not fully complete, on a performance dashboard development system whereby our authority members, based on the strategic plan and based on the business processes we put in place, will be able to look every other week. We meet every other week. We'll be able to look at progress against those performance metrics. And we are also right now in the process of achieving ISO 55001 certification requirements. We will make a decision toward the end of that implementation as to whether we truly want to achieve that certification. But we believe, from a staff perspective, from a public perspective, we're building credibility and confidence in our system by being able to compare ourselves to an ISO 55000 process. And then finally, to sort of demonstrate the buy-in that we've received, the employee support for our remedies, we are also taking those same systems and we're deploying them now, helping to deploy them throughout the city. So in other words, the asset management piece, the information that's at the hand of the people who are actually making the repairs, the reporting that can be provided, the data that can be driven to that performance management system is now the same kind of system that is desired in other parts of the city. I want to go back to the service level agreements. That's probably at this juncture the most difficult portion of what we're trying to accomplish. I mentioned earlier there was a legal analysis of our relationship with the city of Tulsa. We, in essence, lease the system from the city. So who, in fact, is in charge? Well, I would conjecture that, in fact, there's a creative tension between the city of Tulsa and the authority. And, in fact, we are the only body that's allowed to incur debt. Municipalities are not allowed to incur debt. And we generate technically the most revenue for the city of Tulsa. But in essence, they, at the end of the day, own those assets. But the margin of error, or the margin of profit, that a private enterprise would have is the ability to seek another vendor to provide some of those shared services. So what we're trying to get to is a situation where each of those departments, they've already been cataloged. What are the services HR provides us? What are the services legal provides us? Then we measure on an annual basis. In our long-term view, we would measure on an annual basis their ability to meet our criteria for high performance. The question is, what would be the remedy if they could not? And so we're still in the discussion stage. The current mayor believes we're in a situation where we're both working toward high levels of performance management and metrics, and that we can do this side by side. We've agreed to go slow rather than fast on this portion of our initiative, but we ultimately hope to get to a point where we have some level of accountability internally for the services that are provided to the utility authority. So looking back over the last 5 years, what would we do differently? We, as everybody who starts down this kind of road, we're very optimistic in terms of timeframes. It's taken a little longer than we expected. But I would say that that time was well spent. We were careful about our software and our technology solutions. We were careful about our formula for our business case scenario for each capital item. We invested in lots of training for our employees. We made sure those systems were embraced by the current employee workforce. And I think that time has served us well. And I sort of have developed a philosophy over the years, being in and out of the public sector, that it takes about 5 years for real concrete change to occur. And we are actually seeing that. Although I will say, initially, we had some fairly immediate outcomes in terms of savings. So we were able very quickly, based on the business case scenarios, to identify capital investment that we were able to put off 2, 3, 4, 5 years because it was not necessarily immediately needed. So we were able, within the 2 to 3 year time frame, to be able to identify $2, $3, $4 million worth of capital costs that would have raised our rates and defer that later based on our risk assessments. We would have identified internal champions for key components of this work. Heavy emphasis on IT, heavy emphasis on measurement, heaviest emphasis on technology in the hands of frontline employees. Those kinds of initiatives require not just board leadership, but they require employee leadership. We would have assessed the human resource needs probably a little more adequately. We have ended up adding about 5 individuals to city staff in order to accomplish this work. We were not attentive to baselines along the way. So in other words, what has our movement actually been as we've worked through these processes? We don't have strong baselines. And finally, we would have done a better job of identifying, again, the business processes that the technology was purchased to solve, and been much more careful about ensuring that that technology was the adequate resource for that particular business process. What has worked? We've changed our culture and our system from reactive to reliability. We manage toward risk. Our employees embrace the fact that they are responsible for ensuring the reliability of that equipment against specific metrics. We're measuring everything that we do. We have a full-blown and successful computerized asset management information system. We have a strategic plan that guides the authority members and our employees, and we're working together, and it's transparent for the rest of our community. We have a business plan that complements our strategic plan. Our employees have benefited from what we consider to be best case, best in class activities and business processes, and believe that they have enhanced their employment opportunities, their growth, and their development through being part of an overall improvement effort. And we have strong relationship between the board and the mayor and the board as a result of our outcomes, as a result of the ability to constrain rate growth, and as a result of the ability to transfer current cash into capital improvement and repair rather than deferring and shifting to debt or capital repair. So overall results, we have a decreasing rate arc. We have, as I mentioned earlier, nearly immediate savings through the asset management program due to increased investment and maintenance or a reduction of the risk. We have maintenance monitoring and control that we can record and review and measure. We have the confidence of our two mayors, the past mayor and the current mayor, city council, employees, and our customers. And we annually, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, identify cash transfer to capital, which was unimaginable 10 years ago in our system, to reduce long-term debt. And finally, I would say the three-legged stool I like to describe that we have based our system on is heavy emphasis on asset management, which in any utility system is your crown jewel. The technology to capture key information to make informed decisions, and performance metrics, which allow the current municipal leadership as well as our city customers and the city of Tulsa to hold us accountable for. Overall, we've considered this a really positive experience for the city of Tulsa, and we, as an authority, are extremely satisfied that the citizens of Tulsa retain ownership and access to significant public infrastructure. Those are my comments.
Great, thank you, Lauren. Questions from the panel?
What was your debt in 2011? Do you recall roughly?
I'm going to turn that to our finance guru.
Yeah.
Do you want to come up to the table?
I mean, when this all started for you guys.
Sorry, but I wasn't prepared to answer the debt for 2011.
2012.
Our current debt, we have $160 million in water and approximately $240 million in sewer.
And if I recall, we were dangerously close on the wastewater side to being, from a percentage perspective, above the AWWA standard on the wastewater side for debt.
Well, you know, debt service coverage for us is 1.25. We're at 2 now on sewer, but we were down around 1.5 at one point.
How many customers did you guys serve? Or in
132,000 households.
132,000. Wow. Yeah, that's an unbelievable amount of accomplishments that you guys made and implemented all that, all those processes and controls and monitoring. But what was pushing you guys towards the consideration of public versus private? What was it a?
So our mayor commissioned a study.
Okay.
How do I get more revenue out of our city operations in order to fill a hole in our general revenue fund? And the biggest asset the city has is its water and wastewater infrastructure.
So the risk versus the reward it just wasn't there. Basically, that's to.
So how did we come to the conclusion that privatization was inappropriate?
Right. Yeah.
The analysis done by IMG showed basically the qualities we had in our favor, and second of all, we asked specifically for a financial analysis of all the different scenarios, and the advantage of privatization over the value of retaining those assets was not significant enough, and particularly because we had, in this case, we had relatively little fat in our operations from the external analysis. So what we needed to do, quite frankly, and what we communicated to the citizens of Tulsa was we needed to take a public trust, and we needed to operate it much like a private enterprise.
You emphasized public access as a key value. What does that mean in this case? What does that mean for you, public access to a water system?
the citizens of Tulsa invested in this infrastructure financially. Number one. Number two, public trust in its municipal government able to operate the system. If I'm understanding your question correctly,
Well, it's the word access. Control would be, I understand, but what do you mean by access? That's what.
what are you picking
So
up on something?
the next step for us, we have a new mayoral administration, and their performance office is looking at what the dashboard software would be. And the board has been very anxious to put that out there on a public site so that citizens could look at the information and the dashboard data that they would be looking at.
Access to information.
Right, and
transparency.
so right now the mayor's office has sent out an RFP, and they're down between two software providers that the board wants to partner with the city to put that information out there so the public can access it and then ask them questions about it.
I think that was referenced by some of your earlier speakers, is the ability to understand through metrics how their system is operating and how it compares to others, and is it meeting its goals, being held accountable. And that information should be accessible to the citizens.
The other thing that I might add is that previously, although TMUA has open meetings, we weren't showing up at city council meetings except for during the annual budget process to get rates approved. And now we have quarterly presentations to the city council. They tell us what their citizens would like to hear. We present those on public TV, and so the community feels like they're hearing more from TMUA and what's going on with the project.
And we're now requiring, going forward, updates on the strategic plan, goals against the strategic plan. So different areas within the operation will be meeting with TMUA to address how their performance is against goals.
And when the mayor changes, does the board resign, and how does
No,
that
we're
work?
on 7-year terms.
Oh, you have a term. Okay.
So I think that's an important point right now, and I think it was discussed by Mr. Evans as well. The composition of your leadership for your public water and sewer treatments is really your most critical decision. I know in my own professional career, I have not had the opportunity to work with individuals of this caliber that I work with every day on the Public Utility Authority. These are individuals who are not elected, but they are experts in their field. They run manufacturing organizations, they run finance organizations. They take a personal stake in the success of the operation of this utility authority, and they dedicate the time to making sure it's successful. There's been a very, if you heard Mr. Evans' comments, he opened by saying he selected the board of directors. That was his sole role. Well, there's been sort of a informal effort on the behalf of our own authority to identify gaps on our authority membership, and then make recommendations to the mayor as to what gaps are represented, and then looking for individuals who could fill those gaps. There's a dedication and a desire to run a first-class water and wastewater treatment operation in the city of Tulsa, and I really think that comes down to just real engagement from our authority members. There is no glamour in running a utility system, but there is an awful lot of satisfaction of knowing that you're providing reliable, clean water at a cost-effective level.
Your government structure, you have a board of directors and then the authority, or do you also have a trust?
No, we only have the utility authority, 7 members. They break into committees, so we have operation committee, we have finance committee, and we have an engineering committee. And we meet with staff, and we function every other week at length. Yeah, there are no other representatives.
So there's no trust, there's no, this is a different, you have
we are in essence the trust. The authority is in essence the trust.
So what you described, if I heard you right, let me phrase it, if I process it right, is, you got into a lot of blocking and tackling and how do we do things, and how do we,
Just get closer to it.
just get closer to it. So you described, I was in industry for 30 years, and I'm familiar with Malcolm Baldrige awards, and I get all that. And what you talked about was you really got into blocking and tackling. How do we run this authority better to provide clean, safe water and make our residents happy with what they're getting at a decent value? And what we keep getting around here, at least what I'm hearing, is our biggest issue again comes back to governance. We've had this board that, for whatever reason, just hasn't quite done what we needed to do, and it sounds like some of it may have been politics. I don't understand all the history, so I can't opine on that. But so we're looking at different ways of doing it. One is to add a trust. The other is to do what you did, which is just make sure you got the right people on the board to do their job as what a board is supposed to do. And I'm not dissing any current or past board members. That's not what I'm doing. But, one thing is the assumption in Pittsburgh was that the board was doing what it was supposed to be doing, so we would not have a problem with lead and we wouldn't have problems with holes in membranes and that the PWSA would do what it was supposed to be doing. But for some reason, things broke down. But it sounds like you can get it back if you get the right governance structure, and then you get the authority to focus on what they need to do.
And I was struck by the comments from the comptroller related to our past challenges indicate the future does not look positive. But in essence, and the image that came to my mind is not unlike somebody else mentioned, the hurricane. So my house has no walls. Do I stop and blame the previous contractor? I have no choice but to design a plan to fix it and make it habitable. I have no choice.
Right.
And so I think...
And we have no choice.
Our authority chose to put in place a plan. Leadership, a plan, and accountability, I think, are key components.
I have just a few questions.
Sure.
Are you done?
Oh, yeah, I'm done.
Okay. Did you indicate earlier that there is a leasing arrangement in place?
The charter for the city of Tulsa allows for the lease of the assets to an authority.
And what does the term of that lease look like?
In terms of length of time, I forget, it comes up in about, 15 years, 10 years we're away from our lease renewal?
So the Tulsa Utility Board is the organization formed by the charter, and that lease goes on for some long period of time. The authority then leases the operation back to the city employees of the Water and Sewer Department, Finance, and the other departments, and that lease, I think, ends in 15 years. But it's a 40-year lease.
Is it a de minimis amount? Sorry. Yeah. Is it?
Right.
It's de minimis amount. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it is actually $1, I think. And I think the other thing to note is that it describes how we should run the system. And it says, is it world class or best? There's a very kind of broad...
It's first class service.
First class, thank you, first class. And so that leaves it to the authority to decide what first class means. And it's interesting, in the work of our strategic plan, we grappled with that for a long time, because are we trying to provide safe, reliable, affordable water, or are we trying to be best in class? And what we decide are first class. And what we decided as an authority is our responsibility to the citizens was reliable, safe, water well managed, with an eye toward our resources, which, as we all know, water is a diminishing resource. And so, point being, affordability is a key element of our work.
Regarding the strategic plan and business plan components, or the business plan that complements that strategic plan, were those two documents developed by the seven-member utility authority, or was that more of a diverse and broad brush of representation of the community that you serve?
Well, that's an excellent question. The answer is it was not broad-based. It was designed by the authority.
Okay. And is that one of the lessons learned that you would change?
Well, I mean, in general terms, I have a philosophy that the more people involved in a decision, the more likely you're going to get toward a good decision. Mm-hmm. Having said that, when you're operating a system the size that we're operating with the expertise that's required, I think there are some balancing acts in that. So I would say at this juncture, because we are operating at a high level, there are not many citizens in Tulsa who said they should have been involved in that strategic plan. Our goal was to develop a strategic plan that could drive these improvement initiatives and then make that available to the citizens so that they could have input, so they would have an opportunity to monitor. And we are also, from some perspective, under a time constraint.
Mm-hmm. And
if I could add to that briefly, the difference between Tulsa's strategic plan and business plan, and that of virtually every other water utility in the country is extraordinarily wide. And that's one of the things that probably led to them to develop the process internally. This plan is detailed, it's extensive, it's specific, it has a very large number of very specific measurements in it, and that kind of defies that level of detail and sort of command and control defies having the decision making on that strategic plan to be broad-based, community-based.
I might also add, our city councilors must approve our rates. So by their engagement, I mean, it is a communication, two-way communication channel. So we are accountable to city councilors. We meet in their districts on a regular basis. Eric presents, other members present regularly in the districts of the councilors. Part of our effort in the last 5 or 6 years is to make sure that the communication flows continuously from our authority to the mayor and the city councilors. We cannot expect voters, ratepayers, city councilors to take regular, consistent rate increases to improve our system without a heavy level of communication.
My final question is, I'm not certain if you're familiar with the infrastructure in place here and the aging infrastructure and the challenges we have regarding capital. Is that similar to what you all experience in Tulsa in terms of the age and the various challenges you have with the infrastructure, or is it very different?
I would say, no. I mean, we're not at all, nor were we then in the conditions. So the trigger for our overall assessment of our situation was the issue of whether we should privatize. That was the trigger. It was not problems or faulty operations.
But we're also a much younger city, so at the point that we were talking about replacing infrastructure was towards the end of its useful life, so we're a different situation.
It sounds like there was a lot of trust in the community. From what you've described, with regards to putting the plan together, or the need to have or not so much have the inclusiveness. I mean, it's there, but there's some trust there.
If you think about it, the mayor and his chief of staff strongly recommended privatization. Strongly believed that Tulsa was going to become
in
the
Tulsa, not Pittsburgh.
Good point.
Thanks, Kevin.
April Fool's Day.
That Tulsa was going to become the model for privatization.
Right.
And through numerous meetings, through information presentation, through just through a lot of dialogue, was in lockstep with us on our solution and our plan. And this current mayor is in the same situation. And I would have to say, yes, there's a very high level of credibility for our authority members, and that's because we're dedicated to one thing, and that is high level of operation and quality and reliability of our systems.
Which means there's ways to put that together. Somebody's done it. There's ways to do it. It's doable.
But it doesn't happen without investment.
Understood. Right.
Other questions or discussions for Lauren? Okay. Well, thank you, Lauren. I know you had a flight as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. And thank you, Eric, as well. Thank you, Dr.
My comments are available if anybody, outlined if anybody wants me to email them to them. And then Eric has also brought a number of key slides that indicate the level of work we did in asset management, as well as our rate structure and how it compares over the past 5 years. Thanks.
Okay, great. Questions and discussion from the board before we open back up the public comment?
We have one more presentation.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Well,
right.
My agenda says no, but
a very brief presentation report from Tony Hernandez with Grant Thornton on the progress of their financial internal controls and technology review.
Keep this short.
Thank you all very much. I will keep this brief. We're in the middle of doing our analysis, and I want to urge that while we're presenting some of our analysis, We're in the process
Can you
right
introduce
now of
yourself and
establishing-
tell who you
I'm
are?
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, so
You're
for
not
the
on
folks
my
in the
agenda,
room,
so-
my name is Tony Hernandez. I'm a partner with Grant Thornton, and I'm the partner responsible for supporting this engagement. So we've started our analysis both in terms of financials as well as internal control and IT, and we've started to compile data. There are several, I'll say, data points that will point out to the group that are going to bear further investigation from our team, but we wanted folks to understand kind of where we were headed. Okay, so in terms of financial performance, a couple of broad comments. Certainly, we've seen revenue growth every year since 2013. Average growth over the past 5 years, 5.3%. Over that same period, earning margins have declined since 2012. Operating income margin was about 18%, and that's below the 5-year average of 23%. Another interesting data point where we're going to continue to look into is around days cash on hand. So one of the things that we've done is we've compiled all these metrics, and then we've compared them to about 15 other public water entities, utilities in Pennsylvania, including the city of Philadelphia, as a comparison point. So that's part of this benchmarking, and the size of the spreadsheets and everything else is pretty intimidating. And our role here is to digest and consolidate, working with Steve and his team to actually present our findings. So at a high level, so days cash on hand, that number is 59.8 for you guys, which is pretty low. The median is about 220 days of cash on hand across all 15 other entities. Comparison to Philadelphia is about 79.5. So days cash on hand is a little low. That's an area where we're going to look into. Let's talk about capital investment over the last 5 years. It's varied, ranging from a low of about 14% in 2014 to a high of about 27% in 2015. And then we did a lot of analysis around debt and liquidity. Debt balance has increased pretty significantly to about $774 million. That in 2013, and has slowly declined over the years. A couple of the metrics that we're looking into, your net debt to revenue has declined each year since 2013 from a 5.2 times multiplier to about 4.1 in 2016. That 4.1 is still relatively high when compared to the rest of the benchmarking group. Benchmarking group is about 3.2x, and Philadelphia as a comparison is 2.9. So we're continuing to look into it, but that's where our initial analysis is starting to point. Internal controls. We focused internal controls in 2 areas around capital projects, capital budgeting, and procurement. Those processes were very ad hoc, and over the last year or two, they've started to document more clearly how those processes should operate, but there's room for improvement. A consistent theme you're going to see both in terms of internal control as well as IT is going to be around resource constraints. So around your capital budgeting function, that's a single person who is responsible for that entire process. Generally, that's shared across several resources, and they're tending to operate in this mode of being kind of urgent reactive as opposed to planned proactive. So when they're looking at capital planning, they're saying, all right, we're going to focus just on cost and risk, where a mature function with more people will have, there might be 10 or 15 other factors that would go into a capital planning process. And as you're prioritizing which projects, they don't have time to do that level of analysis. They don't have the resources to do that level of analysis. In terms of procurement control, a lot of the processes that you're using for procurement, while they should be enabled by your systems, are not. They're generally very manual. And there are very few of the automated controls you would see with a system that are in place. So for example, you could have an invoice that could get paid that exceeds the amount of an issued purchase order. So there's a purchase order for X dollars, somebody sends an invoice well in advance of that. The system should automatically flag that and say there's a problem. The system doesn't. It could be paid, and it is the responsibility of somebody manually doing a compare of the invoice to the purchase order. It's led to some problems as folks were trying to get invoices paid very quickly. It's led to some dissatisfaction from the vendor community, and so it's an area where they could stand to have a little more focus. The other area I want to talk about is around a broad topic of segregation of duties. And what that means is you generally, with accounts payable and accounts receivable, your procurement process, you need to have those separate. And right now, because you're so resource constrained, the same individuals have the ability to create a vendor, approve a purchase order, receive the goods and services, and approve the invoice.
There's no controls.
Yeah, there's no, you can't, yeah.
So they're manual. The segregation of duties issue is a very serious issue that we're pointing out. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. But the broader issue around, there are a lot of other controls that could be automated in the system, but are not, and they're manual. And any questions?
This is a granular question, but what is our financial management program or package? Do we have
What are
one?
we using?
So you're using Microsoft Dynamics? Yes. And it's again, we're still gathering information, but it has, you have, your support for that package is with a third party, and that relationship has struggled recently, and there's significant, there are enhancements that PWSA has requested from the vendor that the vendor has been unable or unwilling to implement. And so that relationship is strained, and one of the strategic objectives within the IT function is to look at changing those systems.
Dynamics still supported by Microsoft?
Yes, it is. So one last comment in terms of IT, though the issues are essentially the same. The main issue around IT is lack of resources. There's 8 headcount that are approved, full-time employees that are approved for supporting the IT function. You currently have only 3 staffed. And so that keeps you in this mode of we're putting out fires, we can't do very much proactively, and that has trickle-down implications for IT projects and how you manage cybersecurity and how you do some of the pretty elaborate things that like Tulsa was talking about in terms of leveraging systems for reporting. When you've got, only 3 of 8 resources, it's very difficult, very, very difficult.
Why that we only have 3 instead of 8?
There's several issues. I think there is a issue around the competitiveness of compensation for those skilled IT resources, and one of the other constraints they're dealing with is the requirement that you have to be a resident of the city of Pittsburgh to work there. So they can't cast as wide a net for those resources. Any other questions in terms of just initial?
Kevin, can we get an updated, year-to-date
You wanna lead
P&L balance sheet? And
Basic financial statement?
Basic financial
Yeah, so
statement,
we have Kent
including
Lindsay here as a
accounts
finan-
payable, aging and receivables aging, I guess. If you have, I don't know what your receivables aging looks like.
Yeah, I would say this. PWSA does a fantastic job of posting all that stuff on their website. So not only this year, but historical.
And we base a lot of our analysis on the publicly, like your audited financial statements that are on your website.
Yeah, if there are questions or other information that the panel would like to see, Bob Weimer and Kent Lindsay are both here, as they have been in past meetings, and I know they're more than willing to share that information. And obviously, this is, I'm not sure how much time you've spent with the team, but I'd like for the full ultimate report of the financial analysis. I know these guys work very hard, and I'd like, these are anecdotes that you're pulling out, but I'd like for us to have a picture and understand in terms of the recommendations are coming back, that this be robust and fulsome and not based upon initial meetings.
Absolutely.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, Tony.
Steve, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So before we finish, any other questions or discussion from the board members? like to
There
open it back
is,
up?
if
Okay.
I can. So,
Alex?
and this is directed really at IMG, but generally about the process. And you know, we were chatting, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is the level of investigation. You know, and I mentioned this, Steve, on our first go round.
Sure.
Because I hear a lot of stuff, not only from advisory panel members, but you know, the Blue Ribbon panel. I'm not sure that there's a good understanding of the current state. There's a good understanding of the symptoms, right? And I'm looking at your fantastic, first handout about, how you go about figuring out how to solve some issues. I think there's a good understanding in the community about the symptoms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure there's a good understanding of the current state, and I'm not sure that there's a good understanding as to what the root causes are. Is the root cause board governance? Is the root cause the residency requirement? And probably there are multiple root causes. But for us, I think to help you guys make a decision and a recommendation to the mayor as to what's a good path to go forward, I think in doing that without really understanding, those first three things, which is true in any process improvement effort, right? As the fellow from Indianapolis was saying, you got to understand the current state, and you got to understand what are the root causes associated with the problems. I am very nervous as I hear discussions at this level that we don't have a good understanding of either of those two. And so if we naturally then jump to, recommending a solution without understanding the current state or the root causes, and when I read this, which I hate to admit, but I was reading it last night, when I read this, I said, that's it, right? We don't want to head to a false start. Right? Mm-hmm. We don't want to come up with a solution and not really understand what the current state is or what the root causes are. Everybody kind of has a sense, different senses, of what they think the root causes are, right? Because of their level of knowledge, what they've read in the press, what they've heard from elected officials. But what I'm hoping you guys tell us is an independent third party that says, here truly is the current state, and here at our best estimate is what the root causes are, and then we can match up the solution to those issues. So.
Well said.
I can start by agreeing with you that the level at which we can get to within the scope of the assignment here is limited. However, the scale of PWSA's problems actually in a lot of ways make that easier. I think that we're withholding, we were asked to provide our initial impressions and to report on our ongoing investigation. We have yet to take the opportunity to synthesize all those findings. We are looking for the root causes, and because those root causes lead us to understand what the solution is. We aren't just doing this assessment in a vacuum. It is very much rooted in then how do we solve these problems. If what is the root of the problems, and which of the alternatives, if any, will best address those problems, and that's the findings that we will present to the Blue Ribbon panel at the conclusion of our engagement.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or discussion? Okay, at this point, I'd like to reopen it back up to the public. If you want to ask questions or provide comments, just please approach the podium. Just restate your name and...
Thank you. I appreciate you indulging me for some questions.
Sure, of course.
I was just compelled at that last presentation regarding the financials to raise one point and then to ask a few questions. One, I think it has to be stated here that for those of us who deal with the city and county finances, we of course know this, but the city and county operate on a joint financial management platform. And it's important to note that, I don't have the date in front of me, but several years back, PWSA was presented with the opportunity to come onto that financial management platform with really minimal cost. And the city and county operate on that because we have an expansive license for that very purpose, for cost savings. So I mention that because here is yet another opportunity for in-house government solutions with respect to IT. That's my comment. The question, though, I'm very, very concerned, and my office has looked at the audited financial statements, and those are done, and they've been cleaned, done annually, at least recently, by Maurer Dussel, very reputable firm. So I can't understand how the presentation today, we're hearing that there essentially aren't controls, yet there have been clean audited financials. So I'm hopeful that when you do finalize your report, you'll clear up that discrepancy, because there's a problem there, whether you have, and I'm not trying to, make any sort of scare tactics, but if you put those together, then you have a real lack of fiduciary duty, or you have an Enron situation. And, again, I know people on both sides of this, and you can't have both of those at the same time. So if we have a total lack of controls right now, when did that come about? And I think that's very, very important for us to know. Thank you.
I want to credit Kent, by the way. In our very first meeting with him, he said to us, we have financial information. We have it. I wish we could be absolutely certain that it was absolutely correct. And he said the information systems and resources of PWSA are so limited that in order to put together those statements and to give a clear financial assessment, Kent and his few folks have had to do yeoman's work with very limited information. And that was his first statement when we met. This is how difficult it's been.
Other questions from the public? Okay, anything else from the panel? Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I think this was a good step forward, understanding how at least 2 other municipalities addressed this issue. We will have another public meeting, I believe on November 8th. I've asked and I'm not sure if the date is set, but IMG to also work with our communication staff to have a meeting outside of City Council in the community. I think that taking the temperature of residents in the community far apart from the work that we do here at Council is important to us. So at the very least, I'm not sure if that's been scheduled yet, but it is forthcoming.
We're actually meeting tomorrow with mayor's staff to finalize a roster and schedule of outreach meetings to both specific groups in the community and broader meetings. Okay,
so we'll have further input there, but the next public meeting of the panel will be on November 8th. At that point, I believe the goal is to present, is it November 8th?
November 8th.
That will, final presentation of options, well vetted through these community-based conversations. So with that, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. The meeting's adjourned. Thank you.